to me, the right strategy is, especially in this space, we need to show that the host is excited about. We need to show that the host considers a priority to make. It's not the ninth thing on their to-do list. It's the thing that they want to do, because that excitement is tangible to the listeners, and that gets them excited, and it needs to fit.
Hello and welcome to People in Podcasting. This is a show about the people who make podcasts happen at every stage of the journey and every step of their career. Each week, we're speaking to someone in the field of podcasting or digital content and go behind their CV to explore where they've come from, how it made them the person they are today, and where they're going. Hopefully, we'll all come away having learned something new. Why? Because this is an amazing industry full of incredible people from all walks of life. Podcasting is new. It's fresh. It's not been institutionalized. Employers aren't looking for a podcasting degree or 15 years of podcast experience. It's a world where if you've got the skills, you can make it happen. It's exciting, democratic, and hopefully inclusive. And that's what we're here to celebrate. People in podcasting. As always, let's introduce our panel for this week's episode. We've pulled together a group of people at different stages in their careers and different specialties. And each week, we'll be bringing in a guest to hear their stories, get their advice, and maybe offer a little of our own. Joining us today is...
My name is Oriana Marone. I'm a producer at Lower Street. My background from producing is mainly in the theater and film realms, but I've always really loved the medium of podcasting as a way to tell stories. I'm really excited to be here.
My name is Daria Lawson. I'm a junior producer at Lower Street, and I have a background in journalism and radio.
And occasionally throughout the episode, you'll be hearing from me, Adam Bender. I'm the COO at Lower Street and have a background in finding talent in the industry inside and out. I'll occasionally pop up to offer reflections on what's discussed and look at how it all ties back to podcasting professionally.
Today, we're speaking with Lex Friedman, a true pioneer in podcasting. Lex actually founded his own podcasting network back in the early days of the industry, and since then, he's co-founded and held executive roles at several media companies. In 2021, he took over as head of podcast strategy for Wondery, an Amazon company, and today, he runs his own consulting business where he offers insights and advice on all things podcast strategy. On this episode, he'll guide us through the industry's history and share how his journey has shaped his current work as a consultant. Let's get into the conversation. Obviously, you've been in the field for quite some time, and from a position like mine, I'm really curious what it was like when you first started out, sort of what the landscape was. Could you just tell us what it was like then and maybe how it's evolved over time?
My journey into podcasting was largely accidental. I had worked at a whole bunch of startups that had been pretty successful, and then started, a podcast when I was I had a job full-time as a writer. And it was my first time having a job that was really kind of 9 to 5. And so when a buddy asked if I wanted to co-host a podcast with him, I was interested. And when we started doing that, we were on a network that was selling ads for us, which was a surprise to me because I didn't know that would happen. But then after a couple of weeks of having ads in a row, they didn't sell any ads. And I was like, well, it's much less interesting to do this podcast and not get paid for it. Do you mind if I try to sell ads? I had absolutely no experience selling ads or business selling ads, but I decided I was going to try it, and I did okay. And so then I started selling ads for another show on that network, and then for that whole network, and then for friends outside that network. And then, 3 months in, I was repping 50 shows. And so I quickly realized I either had to stop doing this because it was becoming all consuming of my nights and weekends, or do it full time. So I became a co-founder at a company then called Midroll. And at the time, the industry was hilarious because it was, I think people think of it as tight-knit now or small now, and it was even tighter-knit and smaller. And the hilarious thing was watching the journey of meetings with any kind of client. So if it was an advertiser or a potential host, you had to start by explaining what a podcast was over and over again. I explained what a podcast was so many times. Then you got to an era where you would say, hey, does anybody here listen to podcasts? And the only answer would be Serial. And you could talk about whether Adnan was guilty or not. And then you got to a point where people had favorite podcasts. If people listen to podcasts, you can have a whole conversation. But those early days, people, I think, still talk about podcasting as being the Wild West. I don't think it is the Wild West, for whatever that's worth. But those early days, it was a lot of people trying to figure things out as best they could. And especially because I think so many people came into podcasting and the business side of podcasting without the relevant experience. I'm a great example. I knew nothing about the ad sales side and was focused on the ad sales side for a while. There was a lot of not reinventing the wheel, but relearning how wheels worked. So there was a whole lot of that. There was a whole lot of beginner effort where the industry was driven more by enthusiasm than perhaps talent, which I don't say to insult any of the talent that was there. I'm counting myself there, but it was more the fact that I was eager to figure it out than that I was the right person. I was just in the right place at the right time.
It's interesting to hear about that arc in terms of sort of watching it progress. I'm curious on the strategy side if you saw that same thing happen, and maybe is that why you feel like it's not the wild, wild west anymore? Have we been able to get to a place where there's enough strategy in podcasting to make it feel grounded?
Yeah, I think as with anything, really, as more time has gone by, people have had more time to figure out what works and what doesn't, and what makes people happy and what doesn't. And so there's been, I think, a steady evolution, not just of what strategies to try, but what strategies are demonstrably successful again and again. And I think that folks are picking up on that, right? So the more time that you spend doing these things, I think just that the strategy gets more and more refined as there's more time spent and more examples of success.
Yeah, what interests me about strategy specifically, coming from like a production perspective, is strategy is so unique because it combines like business and creative perspectives. So when you're doing that kind of work, how do you find the balance between those two sides?
When it was my last role at Wondery, I eventually became the head of strategy there. And what that meant from my perspective was really kind of a catch-all, because the reason I spent so much time in the startup world was because I love being able to do everything. Where I struggled the most at Amazon, and Amazon was very good to me, but was that Amazon really loves people to have a pretty narrow focus, right? And so that's worked very well for them. It just doesn't work very well for me and what I want to do. So my lens on strategy is it's what are all the things that we can be doing? And that might be what's the right kind of show. There's still so much love for the miniseries, but if you're trying to monetize a miniseries, it's pretty hard because even a successful miniseries in success, after 8 or 12 episodes, it's done. And so now an advertiser can't be on it. That said, audiences love a miniseries. So what can you do to create a miniseries that really speaks to a listener and gets them? What's the right way to differentiate yourselves in podcasting? And what's the right way to make money with podcasts or to find an audience with podcasts? So I loved that strategy role there was wide ranging. What I love about that term really is that it also is, right? So it's really focusing on anything that can be considered important was my view on it. We had a team that was trying to make branded podcasts, right? And so it's part of that story to folks in that space is you're not making an infomercial, right? It has to be, you have to make content. I used to work with a guy, his name is Chris Bannon, and he always said, with every one of these podcasts, whether it's branded or not, our goal should be to win a Peabody Award. And I love that was his aim, and it really was. And so having part of our strategy being no matter what the show is, it should be setting out to be something great. And then thinking about, if it's a chat show, how do we make sure that audiences know that the hosts are taking it seriously, and what do and don't we edit out? And again, how do we tell the story to advertisers and to brands and all that? So I think it's really looking at, it feels very cliche to say, but it's looking at, 360 degrees, but trying to think about the whole journey and experience of a podcast, because there's creators, there's potentially the brands or the investors or whoever's spending to make this thing. There's the listeners, which are a key part of this equation. So it's really trying to think about all the different places and all the different participants and how to maximize everybody's experience.
What Lex is saying here about strategy really applies to the entire industry, and it's something that we touched on from another angle in a previous episode. Successful podcasts and success in podcasting means striking the perfect balance between business and creativity. Having a highly original, creative idea for a podcast is fantastic, but the right advertising, promotion, and overall strategy are what truly determine long-term success. To truly excel in this space, it's essential to build out a well-rounded skill set. This can be developed through hands-on experience, by working across different areas of the industry, by seeking out resources like workshops, webinars, and industry conferences can also be extremely valuable. There's also online courses and communities where you can learn the latest trends and strategies directly from seasoned professionals. Most of all, when it comes to learning about strategy, be cautious of those who might approach you on LinkedIn or Instagram, cold offering to boost your numbers. Real strategy and growth come from aligning creative vision with solid business practices, not quick fix promises. Investing time in developing these skills will pay off in the long run, and really, they'll set you apart in a competitive industry. Let's dive back in.
Actually, in one of the last episodes, I was just speaking on and writing about how podcasting is so unique because in the field, it's obviously great to have your experts, but actually sometimes it's more beneficial to be well-versed in sort of all of the categories.
No, I think that's true. And I think, again, it helps that there are so many, what's the right way to say this? When I think about the startup world, like when you're going way back now, but when you're building MySpace or when you're building Apple or when you're building Facebook and AI companies now, there's a whole lot of extremely specialized knowledge required, right? To build a technology startup, you have to understand some layer of the technology. There's going to be some business people who don't know anything or salespeople or whatever, but like a whole lot of people at the crux have to really have a deep, nuanced technological understanding. Podcasting as an industry started up and the technology came later. First it was, okay, there's now a mechanism by which we can deliver these shows. So now it's like, what does it take to record them? And as everyone has discussed, anybody can record a podcast, right? And you can get mediocre or better quality pretty quickly. And you can get great quality with not that much more effort.
But I think you touched on a great thing, which is that podcasting at its center has always been for the audience. And we work in branded podcasting here at Lower Street, right? We are working directly with brands, and you do have that like infomercial versus something that is captivating and draws you in and allows you to learn about a product, but by happenstance, not by here's XYZ and this is why you should buy it. But it's so refreshing to feel like constantly we come back to the audience. And I'm curious on the strategy side, like what have you found to be the strategies for yourself and the work that you've done that have been the ones that really are effective for engaging your audience?
It's a great question. I think my overall strategy, and now I work full-time as a consultant, and so I work with many of my clients who are in the podcasting space and some aren't, but my overall approach with everybody and with all the podcast efforts especially is to focus on being as human as possible. It's so easy, I think, to fall into this, and people do this all the time, right? To fall into these patterns of talking like a robot, or worse, talking like a lawyer, of, trying to put on a more formal air than is necessary, or to structure things in a way that just feels not human. And this is not for me about AI versus human created content. That's a whole separate conversation. This is much more just about, it's the right strategies to think about the humanity of it all. Like, what do listeners want to hear? What does the host want to do? I was a chief revenue officer at a couple different podcasting companies. There were times where there would be really specific things that could serve the advertising side better. But I would never say, if I wanted a show to be 40 minutes, because that way I could pack 6 ads in there if I wanted to, I would always say to the hosts or the producers right away, like, only if that makes sense, right? If the episode needs to be 20 minutes, then let's make a 20-minute episode and we'll figure out what we can do with that, which to me, again, is speaking to the humanity of it all. But to me, the right strategy is, especially in this space, we need a show that the host is excited about. We need a show that the host considers a priority to make. It's not the 9th thing on their to-do list. It's the thing that they want to do, because that excitement is tangible to the listeners and that gets them excited, and it needs to fit. And then if that host can be excitable and their audience can be excitable, and then we can bring in advertisers and that's going to work because everybody's excited about that too. It feels in many ways very basic, but people need to hear it a lot to really internalize it and to act on it. But the crux of all of my approach to this kind of strategy is thinking about the human side of it all and trying to think about what really works. It's so easy to say, like, we want to make more money, or we want to reach a bigger audience, so let's do this thing. Or we want to reach a big audience, so let's make a show about true crime. I don't think that's a very good strategy because it's really hard to break out in true crime right now. But if you're not passionate about true crime and you're launching a true crime show because you think those are the ones that are really popular, that's a bad strategy, right? But if you're like, hey, people like true crime for these reasons. They like to hear about people whose lives, their lives are better than, or about stories with happy endings or stories with miserable endings, whatever it is, right? Like, are there ways to take those things and decide how that should influence your creative direction? Are there ways to think about what works with true crime for audiences, but maybe makes advertisers uncomfortable because they don't necessarily want to be associated with that, and think about the right lens there? So it's always, for me, the most human interpretations of what we're looking at.
I'm curious if you noticed, genre to genre, or just in the grand scheme of the podcasting universe, like, are there trends that you find come and go with certain things now that we're evolving as an industry?
There are definitely trends. In the very early days of podcasting, it was 2 or 3 white guys talking about technology. That was the trend. That one has mercifully gone away. But when you think back to Serial again, which for many people was their introduction to podcasting, I think that the wrong takeaway was, true crime is what's going to get people to listen. Mm-hmm. I think that the right takeaway was, especially for this medium, narrative storytelling where the host isn't afraid to make themselves a part of the story and to be human about it is compelling, because you saw plenty of like what the Netflix algorithm might churn out versus when you saw like Dan Taberski is a host who I love, and I got to work with him a couple of times, but when he does a show, he's a part of the show, and it's about really interesting stories that were interesting to him. Like the reason why Sarah Koenig was good on Serial is because she was really interested in that story. And so to me, that's a trend that I think, frankly, is underutilized, right? People still think, especially if they get their reporter hat on, I have to have myself arm's length from this. But when they allow themselves the ability to say, here's my human contribution to this, because it's a medium that's very intimate.
I appreciate what you mentioned about, the intimacy and the vulnerability there. You can feel it in the recording sometimes, that real we're getting gold here, because you are willing to take that extra step to be intimate and vulnerable and honest about your place in the story that we're telling, which, it's a hard thing to coach and to teach.
There's a nice analogy as television got increasingly mainstream and they were selling more and more TV ads. They would also talk about like the reason TV actors got so beloved and popular were you were welcoming them into your living room. And in fact, they were smaller than life, which was the opposite of the movie going experience. And that's, I think, why there was such a difference for a long time between movie and TV actors and which thing was the more prestigious thing to be on. But I think that TV developed a form of intimacy because they were there in your home with you. Mm-hmm. But I think that podcasts took it one step further and put them right in your head. Like people are often listening on headphones, or even if it's a speaker, like there's no other filter. There's no screen to act as any kind of filter. And so it always feels, even on the most slickly produced shows, it feels like they're talking right to you. And I think that we develop these one way but mutual feeling relationships, friendships, some kind of connections with hosts, whether the hosts are aiming to cultivate it or not. Like we just start to feel that way because you're so used to them. And I think that it takes just a few minutes of that kind of, I have no idea what these hosts or these storytellers look like, but just a few minutes of hearing their voices and hearing their stories to really feel like, hey, I know a lot about this person now. I'm having an intimate experience with this person whose name I might not even remember in a few minutes. Mm-hmm. It's really, I think, something that sets it apart from other mediums, which is why I think people get so emotional about their podcast experience.
Lex hit the nail on the head. Intimacy and relatability are exactly what make the podcast industry what it is. It's what listeners love about their favorite shows, but it's also what we love about working in this space. I know how hard the whole industry works to keep that human element in both our content and culture. It's that honesty and vulnerability that make the field so refreshing and unique in comparison to maybe more traditional media sectors like television and radio. So if you're interested in media or communications, and maybe you have a taste for a more modern approach, something that puts humans at the core, podcasting is really at the forefront of this evolution in the media industry.
So I want to shift gears a little bit because you're in such a unique position as like a thought leader in the space. And I'm thinking that like when you make a decision, it has the ability to impact a lot of people. Like when you do something, a lot of people are going to follow. Do you feel the weight or the pressure of that when you make a decision?
I wouldn't say that I feel pressure directly from it, because the way I think about it is the goal is greatness or success defined by the terms that a person's using, right? So you want shows to be successful or audiences to relate or hosts to have a good time. And so I know definitively that I have tons of experience, and I would even allege expertise, but that it's also an endlessly, like everything else, an endlessly evolving industry and space, and that what's the right answer today might not be the right answer later. So my aim is always to do my best when I'm helping folks out. And if anything, I take it as a giant compliment if folks are emulating things that I'm recommending or doing. And it happened a whole lot early days, right? Like the most direct or specific kind of example would be, I had a team that was like probably at the time the biggest team selling podcast ads. It was very small by today's standards. And we would have to tell every new advertiser that we put on a show, hey, when this episode drops, you can expect that you're going to hear from 3 or 4 or 5 other companies in the next 72 hours because they're all listening to try to find new advertisers in the space, and they're going to hear you and they're going to reach out to you. And, I still today advise some of my clients that are in the business of ad sales, do the same thing. If it's a new advertiser that you brought in, let them know that they're going to hear it. And then also you can even go one step further and say, hey, if you do hear from podcast companies and you want my help in vetting some of them, let me know. Because I know that I'm not the only network out there. I know there's other shows. And I'm now demonstrating, 1, that I'm not intimidated by my competition, and 2, that I have expertise. And if those things are true, then those are good things to share. And so that kind of philosophy that I share with a lot of my consulting clients, I share because it's how I feel about it too. So I do think it's lovely when people are following the same instincts that I am, or when they're trying to do the same things that I'm encouraging people to do. I think that's great because I'm undoubtedly both consciously and unconsciously doing the same thing. So it just feels like there's something very positive to me and community reinforcing about us all benefiting and learning from each other's advantages. It doesn't have to be zero sum. It can be collaborative and mutually beneficial, which I like.
Yeah.
Totally.
Oh, wow. That's so well said. And I think so many of us young to the industry would really consider you something of a trendsetter and someone who is setting standards for the business. But it's fantastic to see that in some ways it kind of always falls back to that human element, right? It's just about building relationships, and it's about greatness on your own terms, right? On that personal level, like what does the show's greatness look like for the team who's putting it together? I applaud how graciously you default to not feeling that way.
I mean, honestly, I really do mean it. And what's especially interesting is I attribute all of my success, truly all of my success in podcasting, to the relationship side of things. And the way to get good at relationships is, more than anything else, I think, being responsive and attentive. This is especially true in sales, but it's true in all aspects of, I think, business relationships. Like, I was just good at following up. If somebody said, check in with me in a couple of weeks, I put it on my calendar to check in with them in a couple of weeks. I still do that all the time. My calendar is filled with reminders to myself of things to do on different days. And it's super important.
As you're talking about that, I'm thinking about all the challenges that you probably bump into as a strategist or as a leader. Can you talk about maybe some instances where you had to make a really difficult decision and maybe there was disagreements within the strategy team? How do you approach those kinds of situations?
I certainly, there have been all kinds of tough decisions and tough conversations and plenty of disagreements. There was a book that in the early days of mid-roll, probably 3 or 4 years into mid-roll, before we had acquired Stitcher, before we had been acquired the first time by Scripps, there was a decent amount of inner turmoil, all focused on the founder who eventually, we got acquired and he left. But there was a decent amount of inner turmoil. And the COO at the time, a guy named Adam Sachs, who's now a senior executive at SiriusXM, he's like, let's all read this book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And this was definitely an eye roll moment for me. I was like, why are we doing this? And then I really loved this book. It really spoke to me. And it talked about how, you need to be able to disagree and to speak for your point. You need to be able to be heard and to argue back and forth. But once the decision is made, and sometimes there is going to have to be an arbitrary decision maker, you have to be a champion of that decision externally to the rest of the company, to the rest of the team, whatever. And I got pretty good at that. I'm very happy to fight for my side of things internally, and I'm very happy to champion. It's also why I do what I do now, because now I just get to give the advice and they can choose to take it or not. That's fine. But there were certainly times where we had to make really tough decisions. I was at a company where we had to do layoffs, which was super painful. But the only other option was for the company to shut down, and then everybody had to be laid off. And the company then survived and got acquired by Amazon. There have been times where you have to let shows go, and times where you have to pay more than you think a show might be worth, and have to do, and all those things are hard, even when it's not. Part of what I liked about startup is it feels like your money, even when it's not your money, because the business is so reliant. It was a little bit different at Amazon, where you can spend X $100 million, and sure, they're going to be fine anyway. I think I don't want to sound too repetitive, but the approach to all those things for me is always just acknowledging the reality of the situation and being as I think direct gets a bad rap. I think people hear direct and they think it means like blunt or curt. And I don't think it means that. I think it means not sugarcoating for the sake of sugarcoating. I've seen people have a meeting where they're in theory terminating an employee and the meeting ends, the employee doesn't know what just happened. Like, did they get terminated or not? Because people are so obtuse about it. Well, I'm sorry, you have to actually explain what's happening. And so my approach is always to, I don't know, I think when I talk about humanness, I guess the smarter term for it all is empathy. But with those difficult decisions, I think it's two-sided, right? One is trying to be as thoughtful and human and empathetic about it as possible. But then two, also owning it. Right? If I'm making an unpopular decision or a difficult decision, I have to say, like, this is why this is happening. And this is what is happening. Because I think that's better than leaving people confused or up in the air. It's also like you get into these situations where you can say to a team, I remember when I joined Art19, my friend Corey Colessa and I both joined Art19 at the same time. I was the CRO and she was the COO. And we had both left Stitcher at the same time. And the Art19 team, Art19 was coming that had been focused on podcast technology, like hosting and ad insertion. And we were brought in large part to introduce ad sales and original shows. And the rest of the team was like, what the hell is happening here? Because that's not what that company was built for. And so I was like, it was very important to me that we do kind of a tour right away of that staff and talk to everybody and explain, here's why we were hired and here's what we're doing and here's why we're doing. And there were some folks who got it and some folks who were like, this is concerning to us. Ad sales has its own reputation. All sales, I guess, has some reputation. And what does that mean? And, what will happen to the heart of the company? And it was tough, but I'd much rather confront it than just let stuff linger and fester. That's my overall approach.
Yeah, I think that's so wise and so interesting too when you think about sort of the startups, and that culture versus how different it can feel tackling those problems at a place like Amazon, which, I think Amazon has its own sort of internal reputation. I've certainly met I had a handful of people who corroborate a pretty similar story across the board inside there, but it's an interesting thing to talk about, upkeeping a kind of culture and having everybody be on the same page. I'm curious, when you think about within podcasting, cultivating a culture of honesty, of innovation, of creativity, of that human element staying present, how do you do it?
Big question.
It's a big question.
This is actually one of the things that I talk to a decent number of my clients about, because I have I think, not surprising number of clients who come to me because they think maybe I'm a good luck charm in getting acquired. And they're scaling, right? And scaling is hard. When you're the CEO at a 10-person company, you know everything's going on. You can weigh in on every decision. When you're the CEO at a 100-person company, your job is totally changed. And if you don't realize that your job is totally changed, you're not the right person for the job, which is not a bad thing, by the way. And that's the hard part for CEOs to hear, is that it's okay to not be the right CEO for a 100-person company when you were the right person for the 10-person company. It's a different skill and different requirements. And so the only way, I think, to keep that human side is to be really smart about what's going on. And the only way to be really smart about what's going on is to talk and especially to listen. The CEO at a company the size of Amazon does not know what the people on the Wondery team are doing. He certainly doesn't know what the people on the partnerships team or the strategy team or the sales team at the Wondery team are doing, because that's, all a subset of Amazon Music, which is all a subset of Amazon Entertainment, which is all a subset of Amazon. And that's probably okay. But if you're a person who does care about that side of things, the only way to do it is to put the work into doing it. Which, what I really liked about my strategy role at Wondery was it meant that I had to talk to a lot of teams. And I would literally call it my listening tour. So it's like, let me talk to the marketing team and understand what's working and what's not. And if you ask people to complain or to share their complaints, they're always happy to do so. And so you get all of marketing complaints. Then you go to the partnerships team and they had a ton of complaints, but marketing complaints were about the partnerships team or about, the content team or whatever else. And then you go to the content team again. And the part of the job then is, once you've heard everybody, like, there's risk there. If I let everybody complain, they can, one, assume that my focus is to fix all of their problems, or that if I haven't fixed their problems, that I wasn't listening, or that I didn't care about their problems. So that's hard too. And so part of the human side of it is, I want to hear your problems. I don't know what the solutions are, but I want to at least understand as much of the problems as I can, so we can try to fix it. And not everything obviously is a problem, but they don't need help on the stuff that's working well. So it's really a lot of conversations to try to understand what the problem is. And in no way am I comparing what any of us do to, say, the work of Barack Obama. But he had a quote one time that I really loved that really stuck with me, where he's like, I have no easy problems. They don't get to his desk, right? Like when he was president, those problems got solved before they got. So he only had the hardest ones to work on. And so if you think about, well, if it's coming to the point of where it's coming to you as strategist or whatever, that it's not the easy solution, or they already would have done it. So thinking about what are not just other solutions, but like thoughtful or creative ones, or ones that are non-obvious, not for the purpose of their being non-obvious, but because they've clearly exhausted some other pursuits already, is kind of, I think, integral to how to approach this. But it's really the only way to wrap your arms around a problem or challenges at a company in this way is to get as directly connected to them as possible, which doesn't mean you have to do everybody's job or understand everybody's job, but you have to understand their challenges.
So you mentioned earlier about relationships and connections and how important networking is. Yeah, could you kind of expand on that and specifically how it might apply to someone that's starting out in the field?
I have folks who reach out to me, sometimes strangers to me, sometimes friends who are like, I want to get started in podcasting. What do I do? And I have one friend from college who was like, I want to help people in podcasting. I don't even need them to pay me. I just want to start working in podcasting. And so he's like, can you help connect me to podcasters? And I'm like, yes, but it would be a waste of time right now. Do something first. Show them why they should use you for it. Especially if somebody's coming to me and say, hey, I can help you and I don't even need you to pay me. I'm not necessarily going to have confidence in their competency or ability. And that doesn't mean not everybody's a podcaster, right? It doesn't mean that this guy had to go out and make a show, but can he find some work editing a show? Can he do anything to demonstrate that talent? And so I've written and talked a bit about how I do think it's important to take time to do stuff that's advising and coaching. And like, I'll take calls from people who I don't know and try to help them out because I think it's the right kind of pay it forward energy. Like, hey, I'd love to take a half an hour of your time, tell me to do these things. And maybe I have nothing that I can bring to the table, but I promise to only take a half an hour and I will be grateful. Or I also work with this company, or I used to work with this person. It's not that it's transactional, but it's trying to show both sides because you're not really building a relationship if you're just asking somebody for stuff. It's not to say that you can't do it. I've had people ask me for things and we've continued to have, relationships for a long time, but it's trying to think about what can you do that's not just being another person on their calendar? I know my calendar is crazy all the time. And if you can come up with a way where it's like, hey, here's why I want to talk to you. Here's this list of things so that you know what I'm trying to take your time for. So it's easier, faster, more efficient. Like just showing that respect for my time is already an empowering tool from your side, right? Because it's showing me that you're thoughtful about it. But there's no shortcut to building relationships. It's time and I guess it's work. I guess my most specific advice is it shouldn't be copied and pasted, right? Even if you're going to say the same basic thing to 9 different people, you should write 9 different messages because it should be research. It should say, hey, you've done this and this. You've worked at these places. And it shouldn't be Mad Libs where you're just filling in blanks. It should be thoughtful and like, because you did this, I'm curious about this thing because it shows that you are invested in your own time and thoughtfulness, which I think really matters.
Lex really captured the essence of what makes podcasting unique. It's the blend of strategy, creativity, and that deeply human connection that drives the industry forward. Podcasting isn't just about having a great idea or top-notch production tools. It's about understanding your audience, being authentic, and strategically aligning your creative vision with sound business practices. Whether you're an independent creator, a brand, or somewhere in between, finding that balance between business acumen and creative passion is crucial. If you're just starting out or just looking to refine your approach, remember that the heart of podcasting is about building meaningful connections, both with your audience and within the industry itself. Thanks for tuning into this episode. I'm Adam Bender, and if you'd like to join us on People in Podcasting, just email sam@lowerstreet.co. That's just co. Or if you want to stay updated on the industry without stepping up to the mic, subscribe on your favorite app so you don't miss out. People in Podcasting is a Lower Street production. We're creating this to serve the industry and celebrate the people who make it what it is. We specialize in making podcasts for brands. If you want to learn more about us or our services, get in touch. We'll see you next time.